We should be going live any second now. Let's see. Let's make sure. There we go. We're live on YouTube. We're live on X. And we're live everywhere else. Well, this is going to be a fun night. We'll see how much activity, because obviously there isn't much going on right at this minute. But I did put out a discussion this morning, and I shared it on social media as I normally do, for a premium discussion. And the focus was about what I am seeing in the stratosphere, what's evolving, and I made, the title, not thinking it'd be that much of a big deal. I was like, hey, I see kind of the end of this winter, how this is going to evolve. Now, I'm a Gen X. So when I grew up, they were always had like these great commercials that tell you like life lessons, not just GI Joe, but just in general. They had like the rainbow thing. It would be the more you know. And one of those things is reading is fundamental. So when you're looking at a title, you cannot understand the full meaning of what is being discussed without reading the discussion. Of course, many individuals have been commenting saying, oh, no one else is saying the winter's over. I'm not saying winter's over in any way, shape, or form, but based on the data that I'm seeing, which we'll go over a bit tonight, went into more detail in the premium discussion, I'm seeing how this winter's going to end. And it's not going to be something that's going to be pretty, right? But I kind of see how this is all going to play out. So I'm going to share with that tonight. Um, and then we'll talk about what I'm looking at as far as the way this pattern should evolve. What are the forcing mechanisms? We got a rainstorm on the way, and I'm really, I can't say excited, but I'm very interested in seeing how this is going to evolve, based on the fact that we've been dealing with so many drought conditions. So that is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So we're going to cover that, and of course, take all your questions. And just so you know, okay, in case anyone's new, first we go over everything I'm looking at. Then I will answer, which looks like it's already very active. Cards already thrown down a lot of long questions. We're going to hit that, and then we're going to see what's going on YouTube and X. I'm assuming that people are already getting a little antsy on X or Facebook. Okay. All right. So that's good. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at some of the data. We'll talk about the strong winds. And by the way, if you hear some sirens going on in the background, something's going on in Freehold. There's like fire trucks and whatnot running all over the place. Might be due to the strong winds we have. Boy, has it been blowing. We have winds coming in from the west, starting to veer to the northwest. They're currently at 10 to 20 miles per hour. So this is how you read. Let me zoom in. I'm going to teach you guys how to read these observations. So when you have this setup here, this line here tells you the direction. So obviously west northwest. When you have each long line is 10 knots, the half is 5 knots. So this tells me I got 20 knots, which is roughly around, let's say about 23 miles per hour. Then you got the gust here, that's around 32, 31. Some websites change this to miles per hour. You have to check to see what the key is. But that's usually how you read this. And then this is a temperature, this is a dew point, this is the visibility, and then if there's actual weather, then it'll give you the symbol for that. So, for example, two stars equals snow, two dots equals rain, so on and so forth. And if you're not sure, as you know, on this website, on the aviationweather.gov, you can actually click on it and read what's going on here. So there's a visibility, there's our winds, 290 degrees, 19 knots, gusts up to 32 knots. That's getting pretty close to 40 miles per hour with these gusts. So it's been pretty nasty out there with these winds. And these winds are being driven by the strong cold air transport. Now, what's been happening is that with this cold air coming in, it creates a mixing in the atmosphere. All right. And some of that mixing combined with a pressure gradient leads to the stronger winds aloft at like 50 knots here, 40 knots here, get mixed down to the surface. And that's how you get your strong wind gusts. So this is going to continue on into the evening, but start to taper off as you get closer towards midnight. We've already started to see some of these winds starting to back off. A lot of this is driven by the transport of true Arctic air invading our region once again, but it won't last long. Okay, we're going to be on this bit of a roller coaster over the next, I'd say, 2 weeks, um, where we're going to see a lot of cold, warm, because we're starting to reestablish and lock in our thermal gradient again. So right now we're kind of going through a relaxation phase, which isn't a pure torch, like some of the model guides like the CFS and the GFS was trying to show, but instead it's more of a back and forth tug of war. So it kind of averages out to average to near normal, but the reality is that, one day we're going to be in the 20s, the next day we're going to be close to 50. And it's just perfect for, if you wanted to get a cold or something of that nature, just outstanding. You can see, we can start here at 850 millibars of cold air transport, and then at 9 to 25 millibars, continuing to slowly push in. And then the true Arctic air, when we look at the surface here, kind of hanging back a bit, you might be wondering, hey, why are the temperatures taking so long to get down towards the coastal plain as opposed to the mid levels? I figured this would be a good time to teach you guys something about orographic influences. So, why is this taking so long? Well, notice how there's kind of like these humps and dips here and little shifts here and here and here. A lot of this is influenced by the way that the mountains and valleys deal with this low level cold air. So it's never just a straight push unless you have a really powerful cold front, but it's kind of a bleed in. Think of it kind of like maple syrup bleeding down the hills, right? So you kind of get this signal here, a little ridge here, a little valley here. It's not exact when you're trying to read this, but you kind of get the idea of what is happening here. And this is why when we're forecasting cold air to come into the coastal plain, when you're looking for a changeover to snow or something of that nature, you have to be aware that the models have a difficult time handling this type of scenario here. So typically what you want to do is that unless you have a strong low pressure system really pulling on the low level dynamics, you really end up with this kind of hang up here where gradually the cold air comes in, but you're going to get this little delay because of the Appalachian Mountains and the Hudson Highlands over here. You got your Hudson River Valley here. You got some of the ridges here creating some issues. But eventually, once it breaks right about here, once it breaks into the Lehigh Valley and then into the Delaware River Valley, that is when it just fast forwards and drops right down to the coastal plain very quickly. Usually, once it hits here, usually that Arctic air gets to the coast about 45 to 90 minutes later. So this is a nice little tool just to teach you how low level dynamics works. And sometimes it can be really tricky to forecast because the way that the cold air interacts with the mountain ranges and whatnot can create some delays in some spots and other areas where it gets colder faster, which is something we're going to have to keep an eye on Friday morning, which we'll talk about in just a second. So again, here's our cold front dropping through. This is driven mostly by lake effect influences from Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and a little bit from Lake Superior as well. You're getting moisture getting picked up from this cold air, and so you're ending up with this lake effect influence that's getting into snow showers here in northeastern Pennsylvania. In fact, let's take a look at some of the observations here. A lot of it isn't reaching the ground, but you're starting to see it around Binghamton. Unfortunately, there's a hole in terms of the observations up here. If I ever win the lottery, I'm going to make a mesonet here and here, because we really, and probably down here too, right around the Pine Barrens, because we really are missing a lot of data over there. And boy, could we use that additional data when we're forecasting for snow and ice to feed into the models. But I digress. You're seeing the snow here starting to show up here, and that's all driven by lake effect snow influence. So don't be surprised if you see a few rain snow showers changing over to snow showers over the region tonight, but really won't amount to all that much. But one thing's for sure, you're definitely going to feel it tomorrow morning with this Arctic air. We're talking about low temperatures tomorrow morning in the teens and 20s after we've been near 50 degrees. Now, let's talk about our next storm. This is going to get pretty interesting. Take a look at this moisture transport that is showing up here um, from Texas into the Mississippi River Valley. This is driven by the strong moisture transport that is developing from our low pressure system, upper level low, that we've been monitoring. And get rid of that. Makes it even more nicer here in the water vapor satellite picture. I love using this satellite picture. Let me tell you something, guys. If you're younger, you have no idea how lucky you are to be able to pull this up. Because if I was in my teens or your early 20s and being able to pull this up whenever I wanted, I think I'd be in heaven. I mean, literally, I feel like I'm in heaven right now, but you get the idea. It's a wonderful tool to keep an eye on and look at. And what we can learn from this is the polar jet stream here is a very powerful feature in this weather pattern this winter. And I would say the ability for the polar jet stream to rip apart even the most impressive upper level low has been the hallmark for this season. And I say that because already I'm seeing people getting very excited about solutions 10 to 15 days out. And, I can understand why. But we have to recognize, at this point, we should recognize what is the theme for the season. And the theme for the season, because we know we have a positive QBO still as an influence, that your polar jet stream is going to be very strong. And it's going to tend to rip apart and weaken these short waves. And if there was ever an example of that, it's this upper level low. I mean, this thing's very well organized. Take a look at the setup here on the 250 millibar winds here. This is a very organized upper level low. And it's going to be running straight into this polar jet stream. Now, if the QBO this year was, let's say, negative, then you might have a chance here of seeing a real dynamic, powerful storm setting up here. But because of the enhancement of the polar jet stream here, this just gets torn apart. And this is why I said on Friday, I didn't buy the idea of a lake cutter, because you don't have a lake cutter run right into a strong upper level low and basically a reflection of the polar vortex over the Hudson Bay. You don't have a low pressure system run into that. That doesn't make any sense. And it's really hard to thread the needle and get a winter storm here. So I was thinking, maybe some wintry mix over the interior, mostly rain on the coast. Low pressure system tries to do kind of like a jump towards either the Gulf of Maine or off the New Jersey coast, something of that nature. And that's essentially what we're seeing. Now, why was I able to say that? Because the overall dynamics of this weather pattern that we've been seeing since December really is not changing all that much. A few details are shifting here and there, but the overall theme is not. And the theme this year is that the polar jet stream is king. It's been driving the Arctic air, and it's been keeping a lot of our storms in the subtropical jet stream either suppressed or ripped apart by the time they get here, which is why we want to stay away from any solutions of major winter storms, a foot or more snow, stuff like that, because we really don't have the support for that this year. But we certainly have the cold air. I mean, look at these observations. This is some impressive Arctic air setting up here. So when we do get our polar vortex to stretch again, and we'll talk about that in a moment, boy, it can deliver. And there's plenty of source here left. So just to kind of go back on what I was saying to start off here, no, winter's not like over this week or even this coming month in February. What I'm trying to explain is that I'm seeing how this is going to end. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be very volatile. And I will explain why in just a moment. Now, this is the current polar vortex at 70 millibars. Notice we're starting to get two centers here. It's not a true split, but certainly, once again, stretched. But look how strong it is, too. So the winds are pretty strong. So it's a strong polar vortex, but it's stretched and warped because we're seeing the influences of the QBO weakening. And, there are some signals here, and there's going to be research done on this for this year of some influences in terms of the global warming influence because our sea ice is below normal. And the theory, and we're going to test it out and see whether or not that worked out really well for this year. The theory is that when you have below normal sea ice, it tends to help to drive the interruption and disruption of the development of the polar vortex. So we'll see whether or not that actually pans out in the observations. They're going to be doing a lot of research on that. It's going to be interesting to read and see whether or not that theory held up to reality. And so that's going to be something to study for the lower stratosphere, the lower portions of the polar vortex. Now, at 10 millibars, you can see this is definitely strong. I mean, these winds are very, very strong. But again, you got that stretch signal. And again, notice where it's stretching towards, more towards the northern Atlantic. So when I'm seeing this stretch towards the northern Atlantic, I'm thinking, okay, definitely influence on North America. But based on this signal, what do we know about how this evolution usually pans out once we go from February to March? So what I did, and what I'll explain it going forward, is that I looked at previous influences of stretched polar vortexes like this scenario. And again, you're never going to have a one-to-one relationship because with chaos, you already always have different factors influencing the weather pattern, influencing the pattern for this year. And each year it's its own unique little game. But at the very least, it can kind of give me a roadmap of what I'm looking at as we go from winter to spring. So while we're studying that, let's also acknowledge that the MJO is going into phase 4 for a short time. One thing that is very clear is that now, as it's going through the warm phases, it basically heads towards a neutral state. It's weakening very quickly here. This signal here is why I went with a relaxation for the last week of January and in early February, which looks like it's going to pan out really nicely. But the strength of the tropical forcing is falling off, which means that this is a secondary forcing mechanism, not a primary one. So I know a lot of people like to focus on tropical forcing, El Nino, La Nina, MJO. They focus on that. They put up the temperature correspondent with that, and then that's their going forecast. I don't think that's a good idea. I think what you have to do is kind of study all the factors. And one of the factors that really stands out here with the SOI is that this is as neutral as you can get. So for all the talk about La Nina and the MJO and whatnot, you cannot use it as a primary forcing mechanism for forecasting weeks or months because the ability to influence tropical forcing is extremely weak. I mean, this SOI is as neutral as you could possibly get for the monthly value. It's 0.01. The only way it can get any more neutral is if it goes to zero flat. So you can't run around and focus and build your forecast around tropical forcing when the tropical forcing is as neutral as you could possibly have it. And the 90-day value is also falling off and also neutral. And so what we could learn from these daily signals here is that you have a lot of volatility in your tropical forcing. It's not really following the MJO very well, certainly not following the La Nina influence, if there even is one, very well. It's weak. So you kind of want to put that aside as kind of an enhancement, as a side dish to your steak, right? This is not the steak. This is the mashed potatoes. You can mix up the mashed potatoes and it will taste savory with your steak, but it's not your main meal. So what is? Well, we know with the tropical forcing, a lot of the forecasts here a little different from mile to mile. Some try to skim it into 5 and 6. Others try to drop it towards 8. But the overall theme, again, you want to focus on themes. You don't want to focus on the exact point. But the overall themes is this is a weak tropical forcing mechanism. When you're primarily in this neutral circle, that means you can kind of put it aside and not really worry about it too much. But I like to show it because we want to take a look at the whole atmosphere. So clearly, the primary forcing mechanism, the sheriff in town, so to speak, for the rest of this winter is our polar vortex. And boy, oh boy, is it going to be stretched to the limit. Now, this is probably a bit overdone. I don't buy the split either. I've seen this before and it failed epically. But I do like the idea of a severe stretch and one that is vertical like this. Okay. So what does this tell me? This tells me that my idea for February is looking very good, in which that we go back to a cold pattern with a tight gradient and a very active pattern, a lot of storm tracks. When you have this signal here playing out, you enhance the potential for blocking here, right here. So you have your potential there for blocking, and yeah, you can pulse a brief negative NAL, but this is really all about the negative EPO driving Arctic air southward into the United States. Meanwhile, you still have your very weak La Nina influence supporting your ridge right around here. So then your storm track is somewhere around here. Now, notice I know it's kind of broad because depending on the interaction of short waves, you could cut your low pressure systems up this way or down this way. A lot of that depends on the interaction of your short waves between the polar and subtropical jet stream. This pattern, this signal, does not argue for major, huge low pressure systems that slow down and produce a giant L off the New Jersey coast. This typically means that, hey, your storms are moving, you're dealing with some moisture here, you got a nice thermal gradient, someone's going to get to a pretty good snow to the north of that thermal gradient, and it is going to be an interesting time because while we're dealing with that, the long range models will put out all sorts of storm ideas. But my overall idea of February is looking very good. Active storm track. Enjoy the little thaw that we have now because the Arctic air is coming back. And mid to late February, I'm going to need more coffee, which I'm going to drink right now. That's good coffee. Now, my point about seeing the end of winter is that when I see this stretch, and again, it's a stretch polar vortex. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Remember that from high school? Okay. When you have a severe stretch like this in mid February, there will be consolidation, there will be a retraction. And when that happens in late February, that means all your polar and Arctic air is going to get pulled northward. So by the last couple days of February and March, don't be surprised if you get a Pacific air mass flood the entire United States because this can't stay stretched forever. How do we know that? Our last stretching mechanism caused this as a rebound. And by the time we get to late February and early March, this influence will be even more exaggerated to pull up because we're changing seasons. we're going to have more sun, stronger sun angle influence. So your polar and Arctic air masses are going to moderate faster. Your thermal gradient in the atmosphere is going to start to weaken. And so your polar vortex is going to start to weaken. But it's going to weaken in the form of consolidating and slowly fading. So, can you see another polar vortex stretch in March? Yes, but timing is key. And so, what I see is that we're going to get another relaxation as we head into March, and then probably another stretch, another shot of colder air. But by that point, it's mid March, your sun angle's higher, your polar and Arctic air masses moderate much faster. You have to take into account of the influence of the higher sun angle. So your snow threat on the coastal plain is nearly dead unless your snow happens at midnight to 6 a.m. And even in the interior, you have to be very careful of your snow accumulation forecast because any snow that falls during the day becomes much harder to actually accumulate unless you're on top of the mountains, which how many people are on top of the mountains, right? So that is what I'm trying to say. I go into more detail in the premium discussion, but what I'm trying to say is that the way this is timing out, March is not going to come in and be all pleasant and nice and we switch over to spring. No, it's going to be a pain in the neck. It's going to be fluctuations of polar air coming in, then we go warm again, then we get cold again. I'm going to have to get some green tea because I know I'm going to get a messed up throat because a messed up voice because of the cold and hot, cold and warm going back and forth throughout March. So get some green tea and some honey. You're going to need it. But that's what I'm seeing when I'm seeing this. I know based on experience, all right, this is a severe stretch. There's going to be a response, there's going to be a rebound. And if this is happening at this point in mid February, even if it isn't this extreme, even if it's more like this signal, okay, that's still pretty strong to tell me that, okay, there's going to be a response towards late February. We're not going to stay cold forever. So that's what I'm saying when I'm seeing the end of this. I'm seeing based on my experience, okay, I see what's evolving here. Now, what does this mean in terms of the potential for 500 millibar pattern? Well, with the stretch polar vortex, you're going to end up with the pretty impressive gradient starting to develop. You're going to get waves of weak low pressures marching across the region. The first one's heading to the north of us. The storm tracks are going to keep on pushing south as the cold air presses south. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves in the 10 to 15 day period, because on day 10, this is a progressive storm track with maybe your low pressure systems moving right over the mid Atlantic. Most of your cold air is up in New England. Ski season's seeing some pretty good snow. Ski areas are seeing some pretty good snow. We're seeing a wintry mix around here, mostly rain on the coast. If the polar vortex signal here, this sucker right here, if this drops towards the Hudson Bay and then down towards this portion of Canada, let's say around Quebec, okay, if this sets up, and hey, look, you got your negative NAO signal that briefly pops, you got a nice connection here. This is beautiful. This has to happen because this is the only way that you're going to get any type of slower, moderate type winter storm. If you don't get this to pop, you're going to just continue on with very progressive low pressure systems. Maybe you pop off one more 2 to 4 or 3 to 6 inch type snowfall. If you're looking for a 6 inch plus snowfall, you need this to pop because this setup here, this signal here, slows down your low pressure systems just enough to produce, let's say, maybe an 8 to 12 hour snowfall. Does it produce a major low pressure system? No. Why? This is totally wrong for that. First of all, you got no ridge in the west. Why is this important? Well, this means that anything that kind of comes out of here is going to get sheared apart. So it's going to be pretty weak shortwave in the subtropical jet stream. Most of this is driven by warm air trying to surge northward, cold air surging south, isotropic lifting event. So that's what sometimes some people call overrunning. This is not a blockbuster major Coast and Mussolini type winter storm signal. No way. This is 995, 1000 millibar low, moisture pushing northward, cold air just cold enough, maybe a 10-1 or at most 15-1 snow ratio setup, and just waves of light to moderate precipitation. You got plenty of Arctic air to deal with. This is a good signal for driving cold air south. This is a good signal for slowing down your load just enough, but this is not a signal for a major winter storm because this trough here, the trough dynamics basically forces any low pressure system that marches along to get sheared apart in this scenario. So let's test that when we study the 500 millibar pattern here. First of all, here's our cold air. It's dropping south. So again, we know there's plenty of cold air to work with. There's our cold press. Now, when you're studying this, don't focus in on the details here. That's not what's important. What's important is to understand wherever this gradient sets up, it's going to be strong. So yeah, in this signal, cold air is dominating, but it could easily look like something like this. It just kind of depends on how these short waves interact. So over the next 15 days, with that negative, with the stretch polar vortex, you can see with each wave of low pressure, the cold air mass, the leading edge of the cold air mass, presses a little bit further south, gets pushed north, and then drops south further. Push north, there's our low, and then gets knocked down further. So it's kind of a step down process. Now, is the final low and the one that follows after this setting up to have a storm track right through Virginia, maybe to Delmarva, and you set up a moderate snowfall event around the northern Mid-Atlantic? It's in the realm of possibilities. It's in the realm of what I was discussing in my forecast for February. And I do like the idea of a potential maybe one or two more winter storms in this scenario, but that does not guarantee snow in your backyard. I am simply saying that, hey, look, winter is not over for February, but I see how this is going to end. And so, with that, just to kind of give you an idea, remember that strong upper level low. Look how it got sheared apart in this pattern. Remember a couple of days ago where first it had a strong upper level low here and we were in the 60s. Then it dropped to the upper level low here and we had a snowstorm. Then it kept on jumping back and forth. None of them, neither the GFS, the European AI, or any of these other models, had this sheared solution. Because why? It would make the most sense. Hey, why make this easy, right? So with this sheared value here, yeah, you get a nice little rainstorm here, but it's progressive, it's fast, limits to about a quarter to half an inch, maybe a little bit more around New Jersey, which we'll cover on that in just a moment. But again, this is the type of pattern you have here. There's one step down, then here's the next step down, then the other step down. Here we go. It's getting a little bit colder with each frontal passage, a little bit closer with that cold air pushing south. And then here we go with the signal. Now, again, use caution. Don't get tied in on the details on this. But what are we seeing here in this setup? What we're seeing here, what the models are trying to say is that cold air is going to try to press south. The subtropical adjustment is going to be active. Somebody's going to get a winter storm out of this. Where this could be easily shift further north into New York, and we get a wintry mix around, let's say, the Lehigh Valley up through the Hudson Highlands and rain on the coast, or it could set up just like this. Absolutely. And then after that, there's our next storm after this one, setting up, riding along that thermal gradient. So again, we have to study to see how this all plays out. In the meantime, for Friday, there is our rainstorm. In this scenario, our warm air is really dominating, but we have to keep an eye on Friday morning for a little bit of ice here. Let's see here. Right around 6 to 7 a.m., there's going to be just enough cold air in the valleys here that could pop off some freezing rain for maybe an hour. Let's say right around northeastern Pennsylvania, some of the valleys here around northwest New Jersey. Let's say if the rain starts around 6, you might have freezing rain threat until about 7:30, and then we warm up above freezing, and then we're done. Now, the next threat for rain frozen precipitation with that storm is around midnight with the cold air coming in. And you could see a dusting to an inch at most. As far as the heavy rainfall potential, look, our precipitable water values jump through the roof here. So around southern New Jersey, we have a chance here of picking up over a half an inch, maybe up to an inch of rain. And boy, do we need that type of rainfall to address some of our drought conditions. So based on that, based on what I'm seeing here and what I'm seeing on the NAM guidance, I'm liking the idea of about half an inch to an inch and a quarter down in central southern New Jersey, southeastern Pennsylvania, a quarter to 3/4 of an inch around the New York City metro and off towards the Lehigh Valley. And then further north, again, a trace to an inch of snow is possible at the end of this event. Trace to a tenth of ice, snow, sleet, and freezing rain at the very start. And then well north, up towards, let's say, northern Massachusetts and to the north of the Poconos towards Binghamton, could pick up a nice little 1 to 3 inches before the rain takes over. So that's my spiel for tonight. Let me go and answer some of your questions here. Let's see what we got here. Of course, we'll start off with the premium chat, and then we'll check out YouTube, which looks very, very active. We'll see. I see somebody. Oh, someone's birthday. Happy birthday, Carol. That's awesome. Okay, so let me go check some of this out. Card, of course, has a lot of. Let's knock this out. This is very long. Other than our sustained Arctic air, how sustained the Arctic air was, true, I don't think that anything is really a surprise. Even that scenario was on the table if La Nina turned into La Nada. Yeah, I mean, that was part of the forecast, absolutely. Big snow events are simply not common in the I-95 corridor. Yes and no. As I've talked about this before with the solar cycle of having a bit of a connection there. I think it's connected to when you have a low solar cycle, you have more influence on the polar vortex. You have more disruption of the polar vortex because of the buildup of ozone in the stratospheric layers. And so, if you watch where we had our low solar activity, and there's a bit of a lag in this, you see a higher potential for winter storms. We're in high solar activity right now, lower potential for winter storms because of the nature of the QBO and the polar vortex. Let's see here. With activity part of the solar cycle, oh, well, you're talking about that. Storms are either a sloppy mess or suppressed. Yeah, I mean, and we start off from the very beginning with the winter forecast that I did not expect this to be a major blockbuster winter storm type winter. In fact, I even said if we do get one, that would pretty much define the entire winter based on what we've had. And when we take a look at the anomalies, it's pretty much it's worked out as expected, where the coastal plain has been pretty much below normal, but the interior, especially around the Poconos, even parts of the Lehigh River Valley, have been averaging near to above normal, actually. I know some of you might not believe it, but it's true. Thus far, we're pretty much near to above normal to the northwest of the I-95 corridor. Let's see here. Let's see. Sebastian asks, I know it's early, but any signs that March could absolutely torch? I don't think so. I think March is going to be bipolar. It's going to be all over the place. Cold, warm, back and forth. It's going to be a very difficult month to forecast for in long range terms. And I expect a lot of volatility in the temperatures. I'm not so much convinced of any major storms. Like I'm not saying like blizzard in '93 or anything of that nature. Um, but Certainly a lot of scenarios where one day you're in the 50s and the next day you're in the 20s with a strong cold front moving through or a heavy rainfall event. Let's see. I think there's a lot of people who are simply too young to remember the decades where we had successive winters, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row, that were lacking of snow. Sure, I certainly remember them. This is not unusual. This is actually something that is very much normal. What would be very, very unusual, and I know some of you aren't going to want to hear this, is winter after winter of blockbuster winter storms. That actually is not within our climatology. It's usually where we get a string of very active winters and a string of very quiet winters. And quite frankly, that's part of being in a temperate environment, a temperate climate, where you get a mix of you get your 4 seasons. You get a mix of different air masses and how they clash and interact. Being in this part of the climate zone, especially on the East Coast, is probably one of your most difficult areas to forecast in the world because of all these different interactions, both in the synoptic and in the mesoscale, and even in the microscale. Let's see. Have Having some roller coaster temperatures after a lengthy cold period is causing havoc with water mains. Yeah, I could see it. I've been hearing that. Uh, with the same geographic effect on spring and summer, cold fronts with thunderstorms as well, don't we? Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially with the orographic influences, with thunderstorms coming off in northwestern New Jersey, that also becomes a factor. Joshua asks, you mentioned the other day that next winter might have a better chance for snow because of a westerly QBO. Not snow, blocking. Okay, be careful. We cannot automatically assume more snow because of more blocking, because we have to study how that blocking sets up. When you have a negative QBO, you tend to have better support for a more sustained blocking regime. So, for example, if we had a negative QBO this year, the negative EPO, negative NAO would not break down as much. It would pretty much lock in and you rock and roll for like 6 to 8 weeks. But when you have a positive QBL, it pulses like your polar vortex is pulsing. Okay. So it's a different scenario. Uh, do you expect Enzo to remain neutral through the spring and summer? Spring, yes. Summer, I'm not too. I'm not seeing much support for El Nino, but maybe another La Nina tries to fire back up. I'm seeing literally no support right now for an El Nino to return just yet. But spring, I'm definitely confident that it's going to be neutral. Interesting enough, we may be in store for a busy hurricane season again. Well, we'll deal with that when we get there. But I'd say anytime you have the Atlantic being as warm as it is, you definitely have a shot. Now, let's see what we got here on YouTube. As always, I will pick the best ones. Also, happy birthday, Carl. Carol, sorry. Yeah. Carol, sorry. Sorry, I am horrible at names. That's all. It's not you, it's me. Let's see here. So yeah, happy birthday, Carol. Winter is not over, demands Dylan. No, it's not. I didn't say it was. Um, we're seeing very little La Nina pattern. That's true. Not. This is definitely not. Look, when you have snow in New Orleans, you cannot call that a La Nina signal. I don't care what anyone's. No, it is not a La Nina signal. Um, So yeah, winter is definitely coming back. Anyone that says winter canceled because we have a thaw, I mean, look, guys, I, I want someone to find me a winter outside of the 1800s when literally a volcano caused a little ice age period where you did not have a thaw in the winter. Now, in the 18, I think what was it in the 18? I think maybe the 1870s. I have to go back and look, but there was literally a year um, because of a major volcano that went off and basically it snowed in the summer. Okay, you want to use that example, fine. But other than that, every winter I have ever experienced has always had a thaw. Okay, usually it's in either late January or early February, and then you get another round of winter weather after that. Now, some years the thaw may be going from, hey, you're in the 30s and 40s, and now you're in the 50s and 60s. There's even some records around 2003 where we got into the 70s. Then you fall back into the 30s and 40s again. Or it could be this year where it's been the teens and 20s, and our thaw is basically getting back to normal. Another year with no big snowstorms. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I just don't see it. There's just no support of it. We went over freezing rain. Let's see here. Uh, I'm actually really interested in how New Jersey seems to be getting a string of above average tornadoes and what cause that might be. We talk about this a lot in the spring and summer. I'm thinking a lot of the tornadic influence is driven by the urban heat island effect and the very small, you're not going to see a huge thermal gradient, but usually it's within a half a degree, and you're seeing this gradient that sets up this mesoscale gradient, and it causes winds very slightly to turn inward. And so you develop that mesoscale low at the very lowest portions of the atmosphere. We're talking like at the surface, maybe up to 9 to 25 millibars, maybe not even that high, maybe only up to 9 to 50 millibars. And then you get a strong convective cell, thunderstorm, with favorable upper level dynamics. There's your tornado. I also think that with our ability to record the data much better, that we're picking up on a lot of tornadoes that we might not have seen or been able to record properly in the past, especially with Doppler and our better ability to look at damage. There's also the factor that let's face it, we've built up this area, especially around the I-95 corridor, significantly over the past 40 years. And that 40 years makes a big difference because now you have these low weak tornadoes, F0s, F1s, even occasional F2, that can cause more damage as a result. We haven't had a January thaw. Just wait. Today was in the 50s. I call that a thaw. Uh, Can you explain why a positive PNA is so crucial for blockbuster storms? Okay, this is a Costa and Mussolini study. Definitely check out the snowstorms, Northeast snowstorms book from the AMS. Excellent book. It explains this in detail, but I'll give you the basic idea. When you're looking for storm development, you're looking at wavelengths, right? And so you want to have the proper wavelength. One of the signals for a major winter storm is a strong ridge right around Montana, ridge axis right around Montana. The reason why that's important is that amplification allows for low pressure systems on the East Coast to go into what we call a negative tilt. So it would be like this, right? So the negative tilt allows a low pressure system on the East Coast to slow down and turn northward and track along the coastal waters or over the coastal waters of the mid Atlantic. You cannot have that set up perfectly right without the ridge axis being in the right place around Montana to allow for that wavelength to evolve and for the interaction to play out. So, this is why whenever I'm looking at 500 millibars, I'm always looking for those signals because without it, let's say if you have the ridge axis on the west coast, then your whole trough over the east is much broader. So with a broader low, now you're really having to thread the needle, and these low pressure systems are tend to be more progressive, and as a result of them being more progressive, you don't have as much time to develop the precipitation shield. So you want to stay away from major snowfalls for the most part. Sure, you might get your rogue 10-inch here and there, driven by mountain effects and stuff. But for the most part, you're pretty much locked in at like an 8-inch total because you just don't have the time to develop the precipitation field, and you just don't have the orientation of the trough axis to set up a major winter storm. But when you have a ridge axis around the Rockies, specifically around Montana, that sets everything else up to the east of you where your trough is tighter and you have a better potential going into a negative tilt. Now that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get snow in your backyard. It just sets up the realm of possibilities where that low pressure system is going to have the capability of slowing down, pivoting into a negative tilt, intensifying, maturing into a precipitation shield, and producing very heavy precipitation. And in some cases, in many cases, in the form of snow or sleet. I'm thinking the drought's going to break. Let's see. Oh, that wind's really strong. What does the term blockbuster snowstorm mean? Okay, fair question. Um, Blockbuster usually means it's an impact for most of the megalopolis. So we're talking about, like, let's say from Washington to Boston, right? And you're talking about a snowfall that is generally over 10 inches and has widespread effect. So that's usually what we're talking about. Let's see here. Let's see. I think the best example of the import of ridge axis out west is that we have a big storms when the ridge axis was set up perfectly when there was no negative NAO in the Atlantic. 1996 comes to mind. The negative NAO combined with that ridge axis really is a hallmark for your 20-inch, 30-inch winter storms and just widespread impacts. Without the negative NAL, but you have the ridge axis, the storms are usually moving faster, and the focus, honestly, is more focused on the coastal plain and away from the interior because of the nature of the storm being able to exit out further east much faster. So great questions tonight, guys. Absolutely great. Is there anything on X or Facebook or anything? All right, what do we got on Facebook? Let's check it out. What do we got here? All right, let's see here. Just coming into this video, thoughts on late February and March. Well, we covered on this a bit, but basically the idea, at least through mid to late February, is that it is certainly going to be stormier and colder. I like definitely below normal temperatures. March is just going to be a real mess, but there will be a relaxation in our cold weather pattern. Definitely check out more details on this in the premium discussions, especially the discussion I wrote this morning. And by the way, for premium members, just so you know, I'm working on the spring forecast. I'm expecting to have that issued in the first week of February, so next week. So it will be in the seasonal area. And I have a pretty good idea of how I want to start spring. I'm just trying to work on how do I want to finish it as we head towards June. That's a little bit more tricky because I'm trying to work on some of the tropical forcing. When you're doing a spring and summer forecast, the most important features to study is actually features that have become far more difficult to understand, which is your ENSO and your MJL, tropical forcing. Your forcing as far as stratosphere, that goes bye-bye. The polar vortex goes on vacation and hangs out with Santa Claus. It really just literally disappears. So it doesn't have too much of an influence. So spring and summer forecasts have far less factors to study. So they're usually shorter discussions and they're primarily driven around tropical forcing. Forecasts in the fall and winter, cold season, that's where you have a lot more different dynamics to study and to figure out. A lot more competing forces. Mid 2000s had a winter like that as well. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and notice the mid 90s and the mid 2000s, they both had low solar activity years. Interesting stuff, right? And our solar minimum really got kicked off in 2008 going to 2009 and 10. And remember those winters. They were pretty impressive as well. So I think there's a connection there. I've been studying it for a while. I'm working on to see whether I should write a paper on it. So I'm working on studying the details and my primary tests. And again, this is where it takes a long time to do these studies, where I'm collecting data and I want to see what the influence is once we get into the 2030s. I know it sounds like a long time, but once we get into the 2030s, if we see a return of winter after winter, especially the late 2020s and the early 2030s, I'm thinking that we're going to see some winters here where you're probably going to say to yourself, all right, I'm done with winter storms. Can we get a break, please? I know you don't believe me. You don't believe that that's going to be the case, but trust me, that comment has been said before when we've had winter patterns like this. So I'm kind of studying to see whether or not that theory is going to work out. So keeping an eye on the data and see whether or not my idea is correct or not. Let's see anything else on YouTube before. Let's see. Um, oh, I'm not getting into the Super Bowl. No matter what, look, I'm just going to put it like this. We'll have snacks and we will watch the game. Yes, yes, we will. But let me just make this comment on the idea that, the Chiefs are being helped by the referees and stuff. If you really believe that, if you believe that the NFL is scripted, right, I would suggest that you contact a lawyer and you do a class action lawsuit against the NFL and all the betting apps, right? Because if that's true, and then at the same time they want you to bet on it, and they already know, well, that's like betting on the WWE. Okay? They look at what everyone's betting and do the opposite, right? I mean, because everything's scripted. So if the NFL's scripted, and you really believe that, especially some of you talk show hosts out there, then sue them. It'd be the easiest lawsuit ever, right? I mean, that would make sense. Because look, they're telling you to gamble every 15 seconds while watching the game, and then they're going to script it if they really are scripting it, right? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe just the Chiefs are just that damn good, right? Maybe. Oh, we'll see. But I'm just saying, if you really believe that everything's scripted, all right, or that the Chiefs are being unfairly helped by the referees on purpose, then I would suggest create a class action lawsuit because they're gambling. They're giving you advertising gambling at the same time. So just bring that up there. Just a little common sense. Why has the MJO spent so much time in the warm phase in recent winters and just rushed through or skipped the cold phases? Primarily because right now there's kind of a background La Nina signal, especially with a negative PDO. So your MJOs tend to lean more towards that direction. This year's been kind of evenly split. It really hasn't been overly one side or the other. But I think a lot of that is because of the neutral state. But in previous years, you've had a lot of La Nina states. And even with our last El Nino, which is pretty weak, in comparison to other ones. You also had a negative PDO fight, which is cold water around the northern Pacific. So you kind of had this weak La Nina like background noise. And so that's kind of leading the MJO in that direction. Okay. And by the way, never, ever, whether it's the EPS, the CFS, or the GFS, never trust long range snowfall maps. I don't even trust short range snowfall maps. But long range snowfall maps are total complete trash. Don't bother wasting your time with them. Let's see. And we'll knock off the questions right here because it's almost 9 o'clock. Will we expect the morning update on Monday to be late? What's Monday? Is there anything going on Monday? I don't expect it to be. Well, no, isn't that on Sunday Groundhog Day? I don't know. But no, Monday should be fine. The Monday after Super Bowl will be fine, by the way. I'll be fine. And NBA was well known for giving certain stars special treatment on foul calls. A retired NBA ref admitted it to my mom when they were in the same aisle on a flight. Huh? Groundhog Day Sunday? So they're going to be ripping out and terrorizing a poor rodent. Yeah, I think they should leave it alone. Because personally, if it was me and someone came into my house and demanded a forecast while I'm sleeping in bed, I'd bite them. Okay? I sure as hell wouldn't be giving you a correct forecast. I'd be like, yeah, I'd be a very feisty rodent. I'd bite you. Like that's ridiculous. Leave me alone. And I think on that, I think we'll close it out because it's 9 o'clock. Oh, there is. Let me take a look here. Um, okay, yeah, I already covered that, I think. Um, but I think that's pretty much a wrap for tonight. So let me just tidy up some of the notes here. Um, Winter's not over. Active pattern by mid-February, definitely likely to take hold once again. We're going to be in a roller coaster ride for early spring, so be prepared for that. Don't put away your winter coat because it's going to be all over the place. I don't like the idea, and I haven't since October, of a major winter storm. And when I say major, I mean 10 inches plus for the entire region. I don't buy it. I know some mile guys trying to show that 15 days out, but my rule for you, get under 120 hours and then we'll talk, right? Um, Other than that, very active patterns is going to be returning. The cold air is going to be returning. Enjoy the 50s while you can, which is pretty much leaving right now. Tomorrow's going to be much colder, warmer on Friday. The weekend's going to be rather chilly once again, but nothing too out of the ordinary for this time of year. That's it for tonight. Thank you, as always, for joining this live chat and asking outstanding questions. I really appreciate it. And as always, stay safe out there.